They told her she was nothing, a packless waste of breath. For 23 winters, Lyra scrubbed floors, swallowed insults, and survived in the shadows of wolves who would never claim her. Then Alpha Roderick Vane made his choice. Not his beloved daughter, but the servant girl no one would miss. Sent north to a cursed keep where noble-born women vanished into silence, Lyra walked toward certain death with nothing but frozen ground beneath her feet and rage burning quiet in her chest. She didn't know she was walking toward destiny. Stay until the end to see how a powerless servant becomes a queen. Like this video and comment which city you're watching from. The chains were too tight. Lyra didn't complain. Complaining required the belief that someone might listen, and she'd learned better than that before she turned 7. The wagon lurched over frozen ruts, iron wheels grinding against stone and ice. Each jolt sent pain shooting through her wrists where the manacles bit deep. 3 days north from the Vane stronghold, and the cold had stopped feeling like cold. It just was, a permanent state, like hunger or silence. "Sit still," one of the guards barked from the driver's bench. He didn't turn around. He hadn't looked at her directly since they'd left. Lyra didn't answer. The wind did it for her, howling across the barren waste in a voice that sounded almost human. Almost. She pressed her shoulders against the wagon's wooden slats and watched her breath cloud white in the pre-dawn dark. Somewhere behind them, miles and miles behind, the Vane-packed territories sprawled across forested hills where wolves ran and fires burned and people mattered. Here, there was nothing. Just ice. Just wind. Just the slow, grinding certainty of what came next. The Black Keep. Even the name tasted like iron and ash. For generations, the northern packs had sent daughters there. Noble daughters, alpha-born girls with proud bloodlines and ceremonial gowns and tearful farewells. The histories called it an honor, a sacred duty, a sacrifice to awaken the sleeping wolf king and restore balance to the fractured lands. None of them ever came back. Lyra wasn't noble-born. She wasn't alpha blood. She wasn't even pack. She was 23 years old, and as far as anyone in the Vane stronghold was concerned, she'd never been anything but a mistake that breathed. "Almost there," the second guard muttered. He sounded nervous. His hand kept drifting to the silver blade at his hip, like he expected something to lunge out of the snow. Lyra tilted her head back and stared at the sky. Stars still burned overhead, cold and distant. She wondered if they were the same stars people saw from the stronghold. If Maris, the kitchen master's daughter, was looking up at them right now and thinking about the girl who used to sleep in the corner near the ovens. Probably not. Maris had been the closest thing Lyra had to a friend, and even she hadn't said goodbye. Just looked away when the guards came. Everyone looked away. The wagon slowed. "There," the first guard said, and there was something raw in his voice, something close to fear. Lyra leaned forward as much as the chains allowed. Ahead, rising from the white wasteland like a broken tooth, stood the Black Keep. It wasn't large. That was the first thing that surprised her. She'd expected something massive, overwhelming, a monument to the power that supposedly slept inside. Instead, it looked almost forgotten. A squat fortress of black stone, maybe 4 stories tall, with narrow windows that gaped like empty eye sockets. No lights burned inside. No smoke rose from chimneys. It looked dead. "Move," the first guard said. He'd finally turned around, and his face was pale beneath his beard. "We're not getting any closer." The second guard jumped down and circled to the back of the wagon. His hand shook as he unlocked the chain securing Lyra to the wagon bed. "On your feet." Lyra stood. Her legs screamed in protest. 3 days of sitting in one position had left them stiff and weak, but she didn't let it show. She'd learned young that showing pain just gave people permission to cause more of it. The guard grabbed her arm and hauled her over the wagon's edge. She landed hard, knees hitting ice, manacles jangling. "Walk," he said, stepping back quickly like she might be contagious. Lyra looked up at him. Really looked. He was maybe 30, with the thick build of a born fighter and the Vane pack sigil tattooed on his forearm. She'd seen him around the stronghold. He'd never acknowledged her existence before. "You're not coming?" she asked. Her voice came out rough from disuse. "We stay here," the first guard said from the wagon. "You go alone. That's the law." "What law?" Neither of them answered. Lyra pushed herself to her feet. The wind cut through her thin dress like knives. and her bare feet had gone numb hours ago. She turned toward the keep. A narrow path led from where the wagon had stopped to the fortress entrance, barely visible through the blowing snow, but there. The stones of the path were black, like the keep itself, and somehow they weren't covered in ice despite the storm, like something kept them clear. "If you run," the second guard said behind her, "we're authorized to bring you back, dead or alive." Lyra almost laughed. Run where? There was nothing out here but white death in every direction. "I won't run," she said. She started walking. The path was maybe 200 yards long, but it felt infinite. Each step sent fresh pain shooting through her frozen feet, and the wind tore at her dress and hair like it wanted to rip her apart before she ever reached the door. Behind her, she heard the wagon creak as the guards turned it around. They were leaving. Of course they were. Lyra kept walking. The keep grew larger with each step, its black walls seeming to absorb the weak pre-dawn light. Up close, she could see that the stone wasn't smooth. It was covered in carvings, symbols and shapes that hurt to look at directly, like they existed in too many dimensions at once. The entrance was a simple wooden door, massive and ancient, bound with iron that had gone green with age. It stood open. Lyra stopped at the threshold and looked back. The wagon was already a distant speck against the white horizon. Soon it would disappear completely, and she would be alone. She'd been alone her whole life. This was just a different kind of solitude. She stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Lyra spun, heart hammering, but there was no one there. The door had simply closed, on its own. She took a shaking breath and looked around. The interior of the keep was dark, but not completely black. A strange blue-green light filtered in through the narrow windows, just enough to see by. The entry hall stretched ahead of her, empty except for dust and silence. Stone stairs climbed along the walls to higher levels. And everywhere, there were vines. They covered the walls like veins, thick as her wrist in places, growing in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. They weren't green. They were the same black as the stone, shot through with silver threads that pulsed faintly with their own light. Lyra took a step forward, and her foot hit something that crunched. She looked down. Bones. Small ones, birds maybe, or rats. They littered the floor in scattered piles, picked clean and white. Her breath came faster. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Noble daughters, she thought. They sent noble daughters here to die in the dark with bird bones and cursed vines. Anger flared hot in her chest, cutting through the fear. Alpha Roderick had looked her in the eye 3 days ago and told her this was an honor, that she should be grateful, that a Packless orphan was finally being given a chance to serve something greater than herself. He'd lied. They'd all lied. This wasn't a ceremony or a ritual or a sacred duty. This was murder, dressed up in pretty words so the Packs could pretend they weren't cowards. "Fine," Lyra said out loud. Her voice echoed strangely in the empty hall. "If I'm going to die, I'm going to know why." She started up the stairs. The keep was larger on the inside than it had looked from outside. A maze of corridors and chambers that seemed to twist in directions that shouldn't exist. Some rooms were empty. Others held remnants of habitation, rotted furniture, shattered pottery, scraps of fabric too decayed to identify. And in one room on the 3rd floor, Lyra found the first body. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring. The woman sat in a chair by the window, hands folded in her lap, head tilted back like she'd fallen asleep watching the stars. She wore a gown of deep purple silk, now faded and moth-eaten, and a circlet of silver rested on her dark hair. She looked perfect, untouched by decay. She looked alive. Lyra stepped closer, drawn by horrified fascination. The woman's skin was pale as marble, smooth and flawless. Her lips still held a hint of color. Her chest didn't rise or fall, but she looked like she might open her eyes at any moment and ask what Lyra was doing in her room. Frozen in time, Lyra thought. The words rose from some deep place she didn't know she had. Not dead. Frozen. She reached out, drawn by impulse she couldn't name, and touched the woman's hand. The skin was cold as ice and hard as stone. Lyra jerked back, heart racing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry they sent you here." The woman didn't answer. The woman would never answer. Lyra fled the room and kept climbing. She found two more bodies on the fourth floor. Both women, both posed like dolls in various states of false life. One stood by a mirror, hand raised to her hair. The other lay on a bed, hands crossed over her chest like a tomb sculpture. All of them beautiful, all of them young, all of them trapped in whatever moment the curse had taken them. This is what they wanted for Roderick's daughter, Lyra realized. This is what they avoided by sending me instead. The anger burned hotter. At the top of the highest stairs, Lyra found a door different from the others. It was made of the same black wood as the entrance, but this one was covered completely in vines. They grew so thick she could barely see the door beneath, and where they touched, frost spread in delicate crystalline patterns. She put her hand on the vines. They were warm. Lyra snatched her hand back, but not before she felt it. A pulse. Like a heartbeat. Like something alive on the other side, waiting. This is it, she thought. This is where he is. The sleeping wolf king, the curse, the center of everything. She should leave. She should go back down, find another way out. Try to survive the frozen waste rather than face whatever waited behind this door. But she'd never had choices before. Not real ones. Every path of her life had been decided by other people. Where she slept, what she ate, how she was treated. Even being sent here had been someone else's decision. For once, she wanted to choose. Lyra gripped the vines with both hands and pulled. They came away easier than they should have, peeling back like skin from a wound. Beneath them, the door shuddered and groaned. She pulled harder, tearing at the black tendrils, until finally the door stood clear. It swung open on silent hinges. The room beyond was circular, with walls of solid black stone rising to a domed ceiling. More vines covered everything, but these were different, thicker, older, pulsing with that same silver light. They converged in the center of the room, forming a cocoon around something man-shaped. Lyra walked forward like she was dreaming. Up close, she could see him through the gaps in the vines. A man, or something that had been a man once. Tall, powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and features that might have been handsome if they weren't frozen in an expression of absolute rage. His hands were raised as if he'd been fighting when the vines took him. His mouth was open in a soundless roar. The vines wrapped around him like chains, binding him in place, holding him suspended between one heartbeat and the next. This is Kael'rion, Lyra thought, the Wolf King who wouldn't die. She reached out, drawn by the same impulse that had made her climb the stairs, made her open the door, made her refuse to just lie down and accept death. Her fingers touched the vines. The thorns bit deep. Blood welled from her palm, bright red against the black vines, and where it touched, the silver light flared brilliant white. Lyra gasped and tried to pull back, but the vines had wrapped around her wrist, holding her in place. Her blood ran down the black tendrils, and everywhere it touched, they began to wither. The cocoon shuddered, cracked, began to fall apart. "No," Lyra said. "No, wait." The vines released her all at once, dropping her to the stone floor. The cocoon collapsed inward, and the man inside, the king, moved. His eyes opened. They were gold, pure molten gold, with vertical slits like a wolf's, and they fixed on Lyra with an intensity that froze her more effectively than any curse. He took a breath, the first breath in who knew how long, and the sound of it echoed through the chamber like thunder. Then he stepped out of the withered vines and looked down at her. "You," he said, and his voice was raw and terrible and beautiful all at once. "You freed me." Lyra scrambled backward on the floor, cradling her bleeding hand. "I didn't mean, I just—" He knelt in front of her, moving faster than anything human should move, and caught her wrist. His hand was warm, solid, very, very real. He stared at her bleeding palm, then at her face, then back at her hand. "Impossible," he whispered. "What?" "Your blood." He turned her hand over, studying it like it held all the answers in the world. "It shouldn't have worked. The curse was bound to my bloodline. Only someone of royal descent could break it, and the royal lines are extinct. I made sure of that before—" He stopped. His golden eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Lyra," she said. Her voice shook. "Just Lyra. I'm nobody. I'm Packless. You're lying." "I'm not." "Then someone lied to you." He released her wrist and stood, pacing the chamber like a caged animal. The curse was specific: blood of the first royals, blood of the old covenant, blood of the line that bound me. That's the only thing that could break it. I don't have any of that, Lyra said. She pushed herself to her feet, legs shaking. I don't have anything. I grew up on scraps in a stronghold that didn't want me. I don't even know who my parents were. Kellyanne turned back to her, and something in his expression shifted, softened. They hid you, he said quietly. Someone hid you. Someone knew what you were and buried it so deep even you didn't know. That's insane. Is it? He moved closer, and Lyra fought the urge to back away. Think. Have you always been powerless? Have there never been moments when things happened around you that shouldn't? When you survived things that should have killed you? When people avoided you for reasons they couldn't explain? Lyra opened her mouth to deny it, and stopped. There had been moments. Strange moments she'd always dismissed as coincidence or luck. The time she'd fallen from the stronghold wall as a child and landed without a scratch. The way fires never burned her, even when she reached into ovens barehanded. The way the strongest wolves in the pack sometimes looked at her and looked away, like meeting her eyes hurt them. No, she whispered. No, that's not. I'm just a servant. I'm nothing. You were never nothing. Kellyanne's voice was gentle now, almost kind. You were hidden, protected, kept powerless, so no one would know what you really were. And what's that? He smiled, and it was a terrible, beautiful expression. The last heir of the bloodline that destroyed mine, he said. The final daughter of the house that cursed me and scattered my kingdom to ashes. Lyra's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the stone floor, her mind spinning. This was wrong. This was impossible. She was Lyra, the orphan girl, the servant, the sacrifice no one wanted. She wasn't a hidden heir. She wasn't royal. She wasn't... Breathe, Kellyanne said. He was crouching in front of her again, those gold eyes watching her with something that might have been sympathy. I know this is difficult. Difficult? Lyra laughed, and it came out wild and sharp. You're telling me everything I know about myself is a lie. Not a lie. A hiding. There's a difference. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and touched her shoulder. Someone went to great lengths to bury your power, to make sure you never awaken to what you are. They failed. Because I cut myself on your vines. Because you came here at all. He stood and offered her his hand. Because some part of you, buried deep maybe, but still there, remembered what it was to be royal, what it was to command power instead of begging for scraps. Lyra stared at his hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took it. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength, and for the first time in her life, Lyra stood before someone who didn't look at her like she was worthless. What happens now? She asked. Kellyanne's smile widened, and there was something fierce in it, something that promised violence and vengeance and change. Now, he said, we go pay a visit to the pack that threw you away, and we teach them what happens when you mistake a hidden queen for a disposable pawn. Outside the Black Keep, the sun was rising over the frozen waste, painting the ice gold and crimson and burning bright. Inside, something much older and much more dangerous was waking up, and it was angry. The journey back should have killed them. Lyra knew that within the first hour of walking. The frozen waste that surrounded the Black Keep wasn't meant for human survival, not even for wolf kind. The temperature dropped so low her breath turned to ice crystals before it hit the ground, and the wind carried voices that weren't quite wind, whispers that curled around her ears and promised rest, warmth, the comfort of simply lying down and letting the cold take her. Kellyanne walked ahead of her, cutting through the snow like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. He'd found clothing somewhere in the keep, black leather and fur that looked ancient but hadn't decayed. His dark hair whipped behind him in the wind, and he moved with a predator's grace that made Lyra's stumbling steps feel even more pathetic. Keep up, he called back without turning around. I'm trying. Her voice came out in gasps. The thin dress she'd been sent in was doing nothing against the cold, and her bare feet had gone from numb to burning to something beyond pain entirely. Kellyanne stopped and looked back at her. Really looked. His gold eyes narrowed. You're freezing. Brilliant observation. He moved back to her in 3 long strides and shrugged out of the fur cloak he wore. Before Lyra could protest, he wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled like winter forests and something else, something wild and old. I don't need, she started. You'll die in the next mile without it, he cut her off. And I didn't break a 3-century curse just to watch you freeze on the walk home. 3 centuries? Lyra pulled the cloak tighter. You've been trapped for 300 years? Give or take a decade. He started walking again, slower this time. Time moves strangely under that kind of magic. Sometimes it felt like days, sometimes like forever. How did it happen? Caelryon was quiet for so long Lyra thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice flat and distant. Betrayal, he said. My own council turned on me. They feared what I was building. A unified kingdom where power came from merit instead of bloodline, where any wolf could rise regardless of their birth pack. The old families hated it. They wanted their territories, their little feudal kingdoms, their certainty that their children would inherit what they'd stolen. So they cursed you. They bound me, scattered my soldiers, burned my capital, and salted the earth so nothing would grow there again. His hands clenched at his sides. Then they spent the next 3 centuries sending sacrifices to awaken me. Noble daughters they were happy to be rid of, pretending it was ceremony when it was really just murder dressed in ritual. Lyra thought of the frozen women in the keep, the one in purple silk with her hands folded so peacefully. What happened to them? She asked quietly. The ones they sent. The curse took them, used their life force to maintain itself, to keep me bound. Caelryon's voice had gone rough. I was awake for all of it, trapped, but awake. I felt every single one of them die to feed the magic keeping me prisoner. That's monstrous? He glanced back at her. Yes, but efficient. The families got rid of inconvenient daughters. The curse stayed strong, and everyone could pretend they were honoring some ancient compact instead of committing slow murder over generations. They walked in silence after that, the only sound the crunch of snow and the endless howl of wind. Lyra's mind raced, trying to fit together everything she'd learned. Her blood had broken the curse, which meant she carried the bloodline of the people who'd created it in the first place. The people Caelryon had good reason to hate. Are you going to kill me? She asked. Caelryon stopped so abruptly she almost walked into him. He turned, and his expression was complicated. Anger and confusion, and something that might have been offense all mixed together. Why would I kill you? Because I'm descended from the people who destroyed everything you built. You said it yourself, last heir of the bloodline that cursed you. You were a child raised in servitude, he said sharply. You had nothing to do with what happened 300 years ago. Punishing you for your ancestors' crimes would make me exactly the kind of tyrant they claimed I was. Lyra studied his face, looking for the lie. She'd gotten good at spotting lies over the years. Servants lived or died by their ability to read the moods of their masters. She didn't see deception in Caelryon's eyes, just exhaustion and an anger that wasn't directed at her. Okay, she said finally. Okay? I believe you. Something in his expression softened. You shouldn't trust so easily. I don't trust easily. I just recognize truth when I hear it. She pulled his cloak tighter. Besides, if you wanted me dead, you could have done it in the keep. Fair point. He almost smiled. Then his head snapped up, eyes fixed on something in the distance. We're not alone. Lyra followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing but white waste and gray sky. Then movement, dark shapes cutting through the snow, moving fast. Wolves, Caelryon said. A hunting pack. Are they coming for us? Probably. This is Vayne territory, and we're walking straight toward their stronghold. His voice had gone cold and tactical. When they get here, let me talk. Don't show fear. I'm not afraid of the Vayne pack. You should be. Fear keeps you alive. The wolves were closer now, 6 of them, massive northern breeds with thick winter coats and eyes that reflected the weak sunlight like mirrors. They moved in formation, trained hunters working together, and at their head ran a wolf Lyra recognized. Gregor, one of Roderick's enforcers, a man who'd once kicked her for spilling water on his boots. The wolves circled them at a distance, then began to shift. The transformation was quick and brutal, bones cracking, skin rippling, until 6 men stood where the wolves had been. They wore leather armor and carried weapons, and they all stared at Lyra like she was a ghost. Gregor recovered first. He was a thick-shouldered man with a scarred face and mean eyes, and he pointed his blade at Caelryon. "Name yourself," he barked. "Caelryon Stormbreaker," Caelryon said calmly. "Last king of the unified territories, first alpha of the Concordat, holder of the dead king." Gregor's sneer was ugly. "We heard the stories, children's tales to scare pups into obedience." "Do I look like a story?" Caelryon's voice dropped lower, and suddenly the temperature felt even colder. "Do I look dead?" The other hunters shifted uneasily. One of them, younger, less scarred, stared at Caelryon with something close to awe. "The sacrifices were supposed to keep you asleep," Gregor said. He looked at Lyra, and his expression twisted with contempt. "How did a packless waste like you manage to wake him?" "Magic doesn't care about your social hierarchy," Lyra said before she could stop herself. Gregor's hand moved fast, a backhand aimed at her face, the same casual violence she'd endured her whole life. It never landed. Caelryon caught Gregor's wrist mid-swing, his movement so fast it barely registered. His grip tightened, and Gregor's sneer turned to a grimace of pain. "Touch her again," Caelryon said softly, "and I'll break every bone in your hand before I rip your throat out." "She's property of the Vein Pack," Gregor ground out. "Alpha Roderick's to discipline as he sees fit. She's not property. She's a person, and she's under my protection now." Caelryon released Gregor's wrist with a shove that sent the man stumbling. "Tell your Alpha we're coming. Tell him to prepare for our arrival, and tell him that if he values his position, if he values his life, he'll treat her with respect when we get there." "You can't just—" "I can!" Caelryon's eyes flared gold, and suddenly the air around them felt charged, electric. "I am the Wolf King. My authority predates every pack in these territories by 300 years. Your Alpha holds power because my kingdom fell, but I'm awake now, and that changes everything." The young hunter took a step back. Then another. The others followed, even Gregor, their bodies responding to something instinctive and primal. "We'll tell the Alpha," Gregor said finally. He looked at Lyra with pure hatred. "But don't expect a warm welcome, waste. You were supposed to die in that keep." They shifted and ran, disappearing into the snow as quickly as they'd come. Lyra released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hands were shaking. "That went well," she said. Caelryon snorted. "That was a warning shot. The real trouble starts when we reach the stronghold. Why are we going there at all? Why not just—" "Go where?" Caelryon turned to face her. "Lyra, I've been asleep for 3 centuries. My kingdom is gone. My allies are dust. My strongholds are ruins. I have nothing, no territory, no pack, no resources beyond what I can take." He gestured at the empty waste around them. "Right now, the Vein stronghold is the only place within 100 miles that offers shelter and supplies. We need both if we're going to survive long enough to build something new. They hate me there. They hate what they think you are. A powerless servant, a packless waste." His expression hardened. "They don't know what you really are yet, but they will." They reached the Vein stronghold at dusk 3 days later. The fortress sat on a hill overlooking the frozen river valley, a sprawling complex of stone and timber that housed maybe 300 wolves. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and Lyra could smell cooking meat and wood smoke and home, except it had never been home. Not really. "Second thoughts?" Caelryon asked quietly. "Third and fourth ones, too." Lyra pulled his cloak tighter. They'd traded it back and forth during the walk, sharing warmth when the nights got brutal. "They're not going to welcome us." "I'm not expecting welcome. I'm expecting submission." He started down the hill toward the main gate. "Stay close and don't apologize for existing. You're done apologizing." The gate stood open, unusual for dusk when most packs sealed their strongholds against the dark. As they approached, Lyra saw why. The courtyard beyond was packed with wolves, hundreds of them, all waiting in silence. At the center, on a raised platform, stood Alpha Roderick Vane. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and iron-haired, with the kind of face that looked friendly until you saw his eyes. Those were cold and calculating, always measuring, always judging. He'd ruled the Vein Pack for 20 years through cunning and brutality, and he wore his authority like a second skin. His daughter stood beside him, Celine, beautiful and cruel, her blonde hair braided back from a face that could have belonged to a statue. She was supposed to be the sacrifice. The noble daughter sent north to the Black Keep. Instead, she was here, alive, untouched, and Lyra was the one who'd walked into death, in her place. "Well," Roderick's voice carried across the courtyard, "the waste returns, and she's brought a guest." The pack laughed. It was a cruel sound, mocking and dismissive. Caelryon walked forward until he stood at the base of the platform, and the laughter died. Something about him, the way he moved, the way he held himself, demanded attention. "Alpha Roderick Vane," he said clearly. "I am Caelryon Stormbreaker, and I've come to discuss the terms of your surrender." Silence. Complete and total. Then Roderick laughed, a genuine, surprised bark of amusement. "My surrender? Boy, I don't know what lies this Packless whore told you, but—" Lyra felt it before she understood what was happening. A surge of heat in her chest, a pressure building behind her eyes, and suddenly she was moving forward, words spilling out before she could stop them. "I didn't tell him anything," she said, and her voice didn't sound like her own anymore. It was stronger, harder. "I didn't need to. He knows what you are, Roderick. You sent me to die so your precious daughter could live, and you called it duty." Roderick's expression darkened. "You will address me as Alpha." "You're not my Alpha. You never were. You just pretended you had authority over me because I was too weak to fight back." The heat in her chest was growing, spreading, and Lyra realized her hands were glowing, soft white light leaking between her fingers. "But I'm not weak anymore." "Lyra," Caelryon said quietly, "easy." But she couldn't stop. 23 years of swallowed rage was burning through her, demanding release. "You want to know what I found in the Black Keep?" she asked Roderick. "Frozen women, noble daughters from a dozen packs, trapped in time, used as fuel for a curse you all knew existed but pretended was ceremony." She took another step forward. "You're murderers, all of you. You just hide it behind tradition." Celine stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with disgust. "How dare you speak to my father like—" "Shut up," Lyra snapped, and the white light flared brighter. "You were supposed to be the one to die. You were the noble sacrifice. But Daddy loved you too much to risk you, so he sent the Packless girl instead." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Except I didn't die. I broke the curse. I freed a king. And I came back." "Enough!" Roderick roared. He shifted, the transformation taking him in seconds from man to a massive wolf with silver-shot fur and fangs like daggers. "You're Packless, powerless, nothing. I should have killed you years ago instead of wasting food keeping you alive." He launched himself off the platform, a blur of fur and fury aimed straight at Lyra's throat. Lyra threw up her hands on pure instinct. The white light exploded outward. Roderick hit it like he'd hit a stone wall. The light solidified into a barrier that stopped him cold in midair. He crashed to the ground, stunned, and the entire courtyard gasped. Lyra stared at her hands, at the light pouring from her palms, and felt something click into place inside her. Something that had always been there, buried and suppressed and hidden, now roaring to the surface. "I'm not powerless," she said quietly. "I never was. You just made me believe I was." Roderick shifted back to human form, bleeding from his mouth, eyes wide with shock and rage. "What are you?" "She's exactly what the curse recognized," Caelryon said. He'd moved to stand beside Lyra, his presence solid and supporting. "Royal blood. Old magic. The kind of power you tried to breed out of existence because it threatened your comfortable little hierarchies." "That's impossible. She's nobody. She's the reason I'm free." Caelryon's voice went hard. "And she's the reason you're going to step down." Roderick laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think you can just walk in here and take my pack?" "I don't want your pack. I want your stronghold, your resources, your territory." Caelryon looked around the silent courtyard. "I'm rebuilding my kingdom, Roderick. You can either join me as an ally, or I'll tear this place apart and build on its ruins. Your choice." "I choose to rip your throat out." Roderick shifted again, faster this time, and this time half the pack shifted with him. Lyra felt Caelryon tense beside her, felt the temperature drop as his own power rose to meet the threat. They were outnumbered 50 to 1, surrounded, with nowhere to run. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt calm, clear. Like everything in her life had been leading to this exact moment. "Kellrion," she said quietly, "don't kill them. They're trying to kill us. I know, but they're confused and scared and doing what they've always done." She looked at the shifted wolves, at the humans standing frozen between fear and fury. "Let me try something." Lyra said, "Trust me." Kellrion hesitated, then stepped back. "Make it fast." Lyra closed her eyes and reached for the power burning in her chest. She didn't know how to control it, didn't understand what it was, but she could feel it responding to her will, waiting for direction. She thought of the frozen women, the wasted lives, the centuries of sacrifice and lies. She thought of every moment she'd been kicked, mocked, dismissed, treated like garbage. And she thought of standing here now, alive and awake and done with being powerless. The white light poured from her like water from a broken dam. It spread across the courtyard in a wave, not violent or destructive, just there, everywhere, filling the space with radiance so bright everyone had to shield their eyes. And where it touched the shifted wolves, they froze. Not with ice or magic or compulsion, with recognition. Lyra opened her eyes and spoke, and her voice carried to every corner of the stronghold. "I am Lyra of the broken bloodline. I am the last daughter of the house that fell, and I claim my inheritance." The light faded. The wolves shifted back to human, one by one, their bodies responding to something deeper than conscious choice. And in the silence that followed, slowly, one by one, they knelt. Not all of them. Roderick stood defiant on his platform, Celine beside him, along with maybe 24 loyalists. But the rest, the vast majority of the pack, bent their knees to the Packless girl they'd tormented for 23 years. Roderick's face had gone white with rage and fear. "This is treason," he hissed. "She's nothing. She's your queen," Kellrion said softly. "And you just lost." Roderick's face twisted into something ugly and desperate. He stared at his pack, at the wolves who'd served him for 2 decades, now kneeling before a girl they'd spent years treating like trash. "Get up," he snarled. "All of you, get up. That's an order." No one moved. Lyra stood in the center of the courtyard, her hands still glowing with residual light, and felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on her. The power that had surged through her moments ago was fading, leaving her shaky and hollow, but she kept her chin up and her expression steady. She'd learned young how to hide weakness. "This is madness," Celine hissed. She stepped forward, her beautiful face contorted with rage. "She's a servant, a nothing. Father, tell them." "I've told them for years," Roderick said quietly. His voice had gone flat and cold. "Apparently, they've decided to forget." Kellrion moved closer to Lyra, his presence a solid anchor. "It's over, Roderick. You can accept it with grace, or you can force us to make this ugly. Either way, you've lost." "Have I?" Roderick's smile was sharp and humorless. "You think showing some light tricks makes her a queen? You think ancient bloodline means anything in the real world?" He looked around at his kneeling pack. "You're all fools. She doesn't know how to rule. She doesn't know our customs, our laws, our alliances. The other packs will eat her alive." "Then teach her," Kellrion said. "Why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is exile. Or worse." Kellrion's gold eyes glinted dangerous in the fading light. "You sent her to die, Roderick. You looked a powerless girl in the eye and condemned her to death to save your daughter. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." Roderick's jaw clenched. For a moment, Lyra thought he might shift again, might throw himself at them in a final desperate attack. Instead, he laughed. A bitter, broken sound. "Fine," he said. "You want the stronghold? Take it. See how long you last when the Northern Alliance finds out a Packless orphan claims royal blood and thinks she can rule." He descended from the platform, moving stiffly. "I'll even stay and watch you fail. That'll be entertainment enough." "Father," Celine started. "Be quiet." Roderick's voice cracked like a whip. "We lost. Learn to recognize defeat when it's staring you in the face." He walked past Lyra without looking at her, heading toward the main hall. His loyalists followed, silent and shell-shocked. The rest of the pack remained kneeling. Lyra turned slowly, looking at the faces around her. Some she recognized, wolves who'd ignored her, mocked her, made her invisible. Others were strangers, peripheral members of the pack she'd never interacted with, all of them watching her now with expressions ranging from awe to confusion to carefully hidden resentment. "You can stand," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Please, this is weird." A ripple of uncertain laughter. Then slowly, they rose. An older woman stepped forward, Maris's mother, the kitchen master. She'd never been cruel to Lyra, but she'd never been kind either, just neutral, like Lyra was furniture that occasionally needed directing. "Lady Lyra," she said carefully, "what would you have us do?" Lady Lyra. The words sounded wrong in ways Lyra couldn't articulate. "I don't," she started, then stopped. Roderick's words echoed in her head. "She doesn't know how to rule. I need to think. Can everyone just go back to what they were doing, please?" More uncertain glances. Then the crowd began to disperse, slowly at first, then faster as people escaped to the familiar routines of evening chores. Within minutes, only Lyra and Caelryon remained in the courtyard. Lyra's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cold stones, her whole body shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was gone, leaving only exhaustion and a creeping sense of panic. "That was terrifying," she said. Caelryon crouched beside her. "You did well. I made them kneel. I didn't mean to, the power came out, and they reacted, and now they think I'm some kind of—" She pressed her hands to her face. "I don't know what I'm doing. Roderick's right. I can't rule a pack. I don't know anything about it." "You know more than you think." Caelryon settled onto the stones beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You've lived in this stronghold your whole life. You've watched how it works, how decisions get made, where the power flows. From the bottom. I watched from the bottom while I scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots. That's the best view." He smiled slightly. "Rulers rarely see the machinery beneath their authority." "You've seen nothing but machinery. You know how this place really works." Lyra looked at him. "You're just saying that to make me feel better?" "I'm saying it because it's true." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. We need to secure our position before Roderick has time to scheme." She let him pull her up. "How?" "By making sure the pack understands you're not just a figurehead with fancy bloodline." He started toward the main hall. "We need to establish authority, set expectations, and figure out which of Roderick's people are going to cause problems." "All of them?" "Probably, but some will be worse than others." The main hall was a long timber structure with a high ceiling and a central fire pit that burned year-round. Long tables ran the length of the space, and at the far end sat the Alpha's platform, the same raised area where Roderick had stood to pass judgment, make announcements, and generally remind everyone who was in charge. When Lyra and Caelryon entered, the hall fell silent. Maybe 100 wolves were gathered for the evening meal, and every single one of them turned to stare. Roderick sat at the high table with Selene and his inner circle, and his expression was carefully neutral. Lyra felt her stomach clench. Walking into this room used to mean finding the darkest corner and making herself invisible while she waited to clear plates. Now, "Head up," Caelryon murmured. "You belong here." They walked the length of the hall together, and Lyra felt every step like she was crossing a battlefield. When they reached the platform, Roderick didn't move. "The high table is reserved for the Alpha and their chosen," he said calmly. "That's tradition." "Then the tradition just changed," Caelryon replied. He looked at Selene. "Move." Selene's eyes flashed. "How dare you? Move," Caelryon repeated, and this time there was weight behind the word. Not quite compulsion, but close. "Or I'll move you." Selene looked to her father. Roderick stared at his plate for a long moment, then nodded once. She stood and moved down the table, her movement stiff with fury. Lyra took her seat and tried not to feel like an imposter. The meal passed in awkward near silence, broken only by quiet conversations at the lower tables. Lyra barely tasted the food. Roasted venison and root vegetables, probably the best meal she'd ever been served in this hall. Usually she got scraps after everyone else had eaten. Halfway through, a young man approached the platform. Lyra recognized him, one of the hunters who'd confronted them in the waste, the younger one who'd looked at Caelryon with awe. "Lady Lyra," he said, and his voice carried a note of genuine respect. I'm Finn. I wanted to apologize for before, in the waste. I didn't know who you were. You knew exactly who I was, Lyra said quietly. You just didn't know what I was. Neither did I. Finn nodded slowly. The pack's talking. They're saying you broke the curse, freed the old king, brought him back from 300 years of sleep. That's mostly accurate. They're also saying you're going to tear down everything Alpha Roderick built and start over. Lyra glanced at Roderick, who was very carefully not listening. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Well, when you figure it out, some of us want to help. Finn looked nervous but determined. The old ways weren't working for everyone. Maybe new blood at the top isn't a bad thing. He left before Lyra could respond. You're making allies, Kelrion observed. I'm making confused people who don't know what else to do, Lyra corrected. That's not the same thing. After the meal, Kelrion insisted on walking the stronghold's perimeter. He said it was to assess defenses, but Lyra suspected he wanted to give her a break from the staring. The night was brutally cold, the sky clear and filled with more stars than seemed possible. Their breath plumed white in the air as they walked the wooden ramparts that circled the stronghold. This place is vulnerable, Kelrion said, studying the walls. Single gate, wood construction, no secondary defenses. A determined attack would break through in hours. We've never been attacked, Lyra said. The Vane Pack has alliances with most of the northern territories. Alliances Roderick built. Alliances that might not transfer to you. He leaned against the rampart, looking out at the dark forest beyond. When word spreads about what happened today, every alpha in the northern territories is going to have an opinion. Most of those opinions will involve testing you. Testing how? Challenges. Raids. Political maneuvers designed to make you look weak or incompetent. He glanced at her. Some will be direct, some subtle, but they'll all come. You need to be ready. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very small. I don't know how to be ready for that. You learn, fast. Kelrion straightened. Tomorrow we start training. Politics, combat, pack dynamics, everything you'll need to survive as a leader. I can't fight. I've never even held a weapon. Then we fix that. His expression softened slightly. Lyra, I know this is overwhelming, but you have advantages your enemies won't expect. You've lived at the bottom of the hierarchy. You know what it's like to be powerless. That's going to make you a better leader than most of the entitled alphas who've never questioned their authority. Or it'll make me a disaster who gets everyone killed. That's also possible, Kelrion admitted. But I don't think it's likely. They continued walking. At the eastern wall, they found Gregor standing watch. He stiffened when he saw them, his scarred face twisting with barely concealed hostility. Lady Lyra, he said, and the title sounded like an insult. Out for a stroll? Inspecting defenses, Kelrion said coolly. Any concerns to report? Just one. Gregor stepped closer. How long before the novelty wears off and people remember what she really is? A packless orphan who got lucky with bloodline she didn't even know she had. Careful, Kelrion's voice dropped dangerous. It's fine, Lyra said. She met Gregor's eyes directly. You're right, I am packless. I did get lucky, and I don't have any idea what I'm doing. She took a step closer. But I'm learning. And unlike Roderick, I remember what it's like to be at the bottom. So when I make decisions, I'll think about more than just keeping power. I'll think about the people those decisions affect. Gregor snorted. Pretty words. We'll see how long they last when the Northern Alliance comes calling. He walked away, his contempt hanging in the air like smoke. That one's going to be a problem, Kelrion observed. Most of them are going to be problems. Lyra turned back toward the main hall. But he's right about one thing. The Northern Alliance is going to come. When they do, we'll handle it. How can you be so sure? Kelrion smiled, sharp and fierce. Because I've been playing pack politics since before these territories existed, and I didn't survive 300 years of imprisonment to lose to provincial alphas with delusions of grandeur. The attack came 2 nights later. Lyra woke to the sound of screaming. She rolled out of bed, the alpha's chamber, which still felt wrong to occupy, and grabbed the heavy cloak Kelrion had given her. Outside her window, orange light flickered against the darkness. Fire. She ran into the corridor and nearly collided with Kelrion. He was already armed, a long blade in each hand, his expression grim. "What's happening?" "Raid," he said shortly. "Southeast wall. At least 30 attackers, maybe more." "Who?" "Does it matter?" He grabbed her arm. "Come on. We need to get you somewhere safe." "I'm not hiding." "I'm not hiding," she repeated firmly. "If I run and hide the first time we're attacked, no one will ever respect me. I need to be visible." Calerion's jaw clenched. "You don't know how to fight." "Then give me a weapon and I'll learn fast." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he pulled a short blade from his belt and handed it to her. "Stay behind me. If someone gets close, go for the throat or the gut. Don't try to be fancy." They ran through the stronghold together. Other wolves were emerging from sleeping quarters, some already shifted, all armed and moving toward the sounds of combat. The organization was impressive. Roderick might have been a coward, but he'd clearly drilled his pack well. They reached the courtyard to find chaos. The southeast wall was burning, flames climbing the wooden ramparts and casting wild shadows across the grounds. Attackers were pouring through a breach in the defenses. Wolves Lyra didn't recognize, wearing armor marked with symbols she'd never seen. "Blackridge Pack," Calrion growled. "One of Roderick's old rivals. Someone must have told them about the change in leadership." A shifted wolf charged at them, all fangs and fury. Calrion met it with brutal efficiency, his blade finding the creature's throat before it could close the distance. Blood sprayed hot across the cold stones. Lyra tightened her grip on her weapon and tried not to be sick. More attackers came. The Vane Pack met them with organized resistance, forming defensive lines and working in coordinated units. Lyra spotted Finn fighting alongside two other young wolves, holding a choke point near the main hall. Then she saw Gregor. He was fighting, but not where he should be. Instead of reinforcing the breach, he was pulling wolves back, creating gaps in the defense. Sabotage. "Calrion!" Lyra shouted over the noise. "Gregor's working with them." Calrion followed her gaze and cursed. "Fall back to the hall. I'll handle—" An attacker broke through the lines, heading straight for Lyra, a massive shifted wolf with gray fur and scars across its muzzle. It moved fast, too fast, and Lyra knew she couldn't dodge. She threw up her hands on pure instinct, and the white light exploded outward. The wolf hit the barrier and yelped, thrown backward with enough force to crack its skull against the courtyard stones. It didn't get up. Lyra stared at her glowing hands, at the dead wolf, at the sudden silence spreading around her. Every fighter in the courtyard, attacker and defender alike, had stopped to stare. "Get them!" someone screamed from beyond the breach. "Kill the queen before she—" The power surged again, but this time Lyra didn't fight it. She let it flow, let it pour out of her in waves of white radiance that spread across the entire courtyard. Where it touched the attackers, they froze, not with ice but with recognition, with instinctive submission to something older and stronger than individual will. The Blackridge wolves dropped their weapons. One by one, they shifted back to human form and knelt. The silence was absolute. Lyra stood in the center of the carnage, glowing like a star, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. This wasn't luck or accident or blind instinct anymore. This was power, real power, the kind that bent the world to her will, and it terrified her. She let the light fade and nearly collapsed. Calrion caught her, his hands steady and warm. "Easy," he murmured. "You're okay." "What did I just do?" "Ended a raid without killing anyone," he said. "That's unprecedented." Around them, the Vane Pack was securing the surrendered Blackridge wolves. Finn was organizing the effort, barking orders with surprising authority. Roderick appeared from the main hall, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. He looked at the kneeling attackers, at Lyra, back to the attackers. "Well," he said finally, "that's one way to handle a raid." "Where were you?" Lyra demanded. Her voice shook with exhaustion and anger. "We were being attacked and you were, what, hiding?" "Securing the non-combatants," Roderick said calmly. "It's standard protocol during raids." "Is it also standard protocol for your enforcers to sabotage the defense?" She pointed at Gregor, who was trying to slip away toward the gates. "He was pulling our fighters back, creating openings for the attackers." Every eye turned to Gregor. He stopped, his scarred face going pale. "That's a lie." "I saw you," Lyra said. "So did others." She looked around. Anyone else see Gregor pulling fighters away from the breach? Slowly, 3 hands went up, then 5, then a dozen. Gregor's expression twisted with rage and desperation. She's a packless waste playing at being alpha. I was trying to get us all killed, Finn interrupted. I saw it too. You were working with them. Gregor? Roderick's voice was cold and hard. Is this true? I was protecting the pack from her. Gregor pointed at Lyra with a shaking hand. She's going to destroy everything you built. I was trying to fix it before what? Kelrion asked quietly. Before she proved she could defend this stronghold better than your former alpha? Before she showed mercy to defeated enemies instead of slaughtering them? She's weak, Gregor spat. Mercy is weakness. The old ways are over, Lyra said. She was so tired she could barely stand, but she forced steel into her voice. You want to know what I am, Gregor? I'm the orphan girl who survived 23 years in a pack that treated her like garbage. I'm the sacrifice who walked into death and came back with a king. And I'm the queen who just ended a raid without losing a single defender. She walked toward him, and to her satisfaction he backed away. You think I'm weak because I choose mercy? She continued. You think power only comes from violence and fear? She stopped an arm's length away. I could kill you right now. The pack would probably thank me, but I'm not going to. Why not? Because proving you wrong is better. She turned to address the assembled wolves. Gregor committed treason. He aided our enemies and endangered the pack. Under the old laws, the punishment would be execution. Nods from the crowd. Even Roderick didn't argue. But I'm not interested in the old laws, Lyra said. Gregor, you're stripped of rank. You're no longer an enforcer, no longer a member of the Alpha's guard. You'll work in the kitchens, the stables, the places you considered beneath you. You'll learn what it's like to serve instead of command. Gregor's face went white, then red with humiliation. You can't. I can. And if you ever raise a hand against this pack again, execution will seem merciful. She looked around at the watching faces. That goes for anyone else thinking about betraying us. I'm offering a new way, but I'm not a fool. Test me, and you'll learn why mercy and weakness aren't the same thing. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Then Finn stepped forward and knelt. I serve the queen. One by one, others followed. Not everyone. Lyra saw resentment on some faces, calculation on others, but enough. More than half the pack kneeling in the bloody courtyard, acknowledging her authority. Roderick watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. The Blackridge wolves were secured in the stronghold's holding cells, stone chambers beneath the main hall that had been empty for years. Lyra stood outside the bars studying the defeated raiders. Their leader was a woman maybe 10 years older than Lyra, with iron gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. She sat against the far wall, arms crossed, radiating contempt. Alpha Marin, Kelrion said quietly, leader of the Blackridge pack. She's been trying to expand her territory for years, but Roderick always held her off. Why attack now? Lyra asked. Because you're new, Marin said. Her voice was harsh and direct. Word spread fast about Roderick's overthrow. We figured a packless orphan would be easy prey. She smiled without humor. We were wrong. What were you planning to do if you won? Kill you. Install our own puppet Alpha. Absorb the Vane pack into Blackridge territory. Marin shrugged. Standard conquest. And now? Now I'm at your mercy. Marin leaned forward. So what's it going to be, little queen? Execution? Imprisonment? Ransom? Lyra studied her. Marin was dangerous, ambitious, ruthless. Everything Lyra wasn't, but she was also honest, and there was something almost refreshing about that directness after days of navigating Roderick's political games. I'm going to offer you a choice, Lyra said. Marin raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Go home, take your wolves, and leave. In exchange, I want a truce, not an alliance, just an agreement that we won't attack each other. For 1 year. That's it? That's it. Marin studied her with new interest. And if I refuse? Then you stay in this cell while your pack falls apart without leadership. Your second will probably take over, and you'll become a cautionary tale about failed raids. Lyra met her eyes. Or you accept that you lost, go home, and live to fight another day. When the year is up, if you still want to test me, we can settle it then. Silence. Marin's expression was unreadable. You're either very clever or very naive, she said finally. Maybe both. Fair enough. Marin stood and approached the bars. I accept your terms. 1 year truce, then we'll see. She smiled slightly. I think I like you, little queen. You're strange. I get that a lot. Lyra released them at dawn. The Blackridge wolves left quietly, carrying their wounded, their expressions ranging from confusion to grudging respect. Marin paused at the gate and looked back. 1 year bet, she called. Make it count. Then they were gone, disappearing into the forest as the sun broke over the mountains. Lyra stood in the courtyard, watching them go, and felt Caelryon move up beside her. That was risky, he said. I know. It might also have been brilliant. He glanced at her. You just turned an enemy into a potential ally. If Marin honors the truce, other packs will notice. They'll start wondering if maybe making peace with you is smarter than making war. And if she doesn't honor it? Then we deal with that in a year, Caelryon smiled. But I don't think she will. Marin's many things, but she's not a liar. When she gives her word, she keeps it. Lyra nodded slowly. She was so tired she felt hollow, but beneath the exhaustion was something else, something that felt almost like hope. Caelryon, she said quietly, do you think I can actually do this? I think you already are. The celebration that night was muted but genuine. The pack had defended their home, their new queen had proven herself in combat, and they'd survived with minimal casualties. Lyra sat at the high table and tried to feel like she belonged there. Roderick sat at the far end, quiet and watchful. He'd said little since the raid, just observed with those calculating eyes. Halfway through the meal, he stood and walked to Lyra's seat. The hall fell silent. A word, Roderick said. In private. Lyra glanced at Caelryon, who nodded slightly. She stood and followed Roderick to a side chamber off the main hall. Inside, away from watching eyes, Roderick turned to face her. You did well tonight, he said simply. Lyra blinked, surprised. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not offering praise, just stating fact. He walked to the window, looking out at the dark forest. You handled Marin better than I would have. The truce was smart. Risky, but smart. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand something. He turned back to her. I sent you to the Black Keep because I thought you were expendable. I was wrong, but that doesn't mean I'm going to kneel and serve you like a loyal advisor. I didn't think you would. Good. We understand each other. Roderick moved closer. But I will give you one piece of advice. The Northern Alliance meets in 3 weeks at the Winter Gathering. Every major alpha will be there. They're going to test you, some with words, some with challenges, some with traps you won't see coming. Why tell me this? Because if you fail, this entire pack suffers, including my daughter. His expression hardened. I may not be alpha anymore, but these are still my people. I won't see them destroyed because you weren't prepared. So help me prepare. Roderick was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. 3 weeks, he said. That's how long you have to learn what takes most alphas a lifetime. Politics, combat, alliance management, territory law. He smiled grimly. I hope you're a fast learner, little queen. He left without waiting for an answer. Lyra stood alone in the chamber, her mind racing. 3 weeks. 21 days to transform from a servant girl into a leader who could face the most powerful alphas in the Northern Territories and survive. It was impossible. But then, breaking a 300-year curse had been impossible too. She walked back into the hall to find Caelryon waiting. What did he want? To help, Lyra said. I think. You don't sound certain. I'm not. With Roderick, I don't think anyone can be certain. She sat down, suddenly exhausted again. He told me about the Winter Gathering. All the alphas will be there. I know. I was planning to tell you tomorrow. Caelryon. Lyra turned to face him fully. Can I ask you something? Always. Why are you helping me? Really? She studied his face. You could have left after I freed you, gone anywhere, rebuilt your kingdom on your own terms. Instead, you stayed. Why? Caelryon was quiet for a moment, his gold eyes reflecting the firelight. Because for 300 years, I watched noble daughters die to feed the curse that imprisoned me, he said finally. Young women sacrificed by families who cared more about power than people, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. His expression softened. Then you walked in. Not noble, not wanted, not supposed to matter, and you broke something that should have been unbreakable. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. He smiled slightly. You're living proof that power doesn't come from bloodline or status. It comes from will and courage and refusing to accept the role people force on you. That's exactly what I was trying to build before the curse. A kingdom where anyone could rise, where worth was earned instead of inherited. He reached out and took her hand. Help me build it again, he said quietly. With you as queen. Lyra stared at their joined hands, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Not just alliance or protection, but partnership. A chance to create something new from the ashes of what had been. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Neither do I, Caelryon admitted. But I'd rather try with you than succeed with anyone else. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the bloodstains in the courtyard with white silence. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the stronghold, in halls and keeps and wild territories across the north, alphas were hearing about the Packless girl who'd become a queen. They were hearing. And they were coming. The training started before dawn. Lyra woke to Caelryon pounding on her door, his voice carrying through the wood with irritating cheerfulness. Up, now, we're losing daylight. It's still dark, she groaned, rolling over in the too large bed that still didn't feel like hers. Exactly, we're already behind. She dragged herself out of bed, pulled on the leather training clothes someone had left outside her door, and stumbled into the corridor to find Caelryon waiting with 2 practice swords and an expression that promised pain. I hate you, she muttered. You'll hate me more in an hour. Come on. The training yard was empty and frozen, the ground hard as stone beneath a thin layer of fresh snow. Caelryon led her to the center and tossed her one of the practice blades. She caught it awkwardly. The weight was all wrong, too heavy at the tip, and her grip felt clumsy. First lesson, Caelryon said. Stop thinking like a victim. Excuse me? Your stance, your grip, everything about how you're holding that sword says you expect to lose. He moved closer, adjusting her hands on the hilt. You spent 23 years learning to make yourself small and inoffensive. Now you need to unlearn it. That's easier said than he attacked. The practice blade came at her fast, aimed at her ribs, and Lyra barely got her own sword up in time to block. The impact jarred her arms and sent her stumbling backward. Stop retreating, Caelryon said. He pressed forward, blade moving in controlled strikes that forced Lyra to defend desperately. You're stronger than you think. Faster. Stop assuming you'll lose and fight back. She tried. She really did. But every instinct screamed at her to dodge, to run, to avoid confrontation. 23 years of conditioning didn't disappear in one morning. Caelryon's blade tapped her shoulder. Dead. Again. Lyra gritted her teeth and raised her sword. They went until she could barely lift her arms, until sweat soaked through her clothes despite the freezing air, until her hands were covered in blisters from gripping the unfamiliar weapon. Better, Caelryon said finally. Not good, but better. You're starting to think offense instead of just defense. I feel like I got beaten with a stick. You basically did. He took the practice sword from her shaking hands. Go eat. You've got an hour before Roderick starts your politics lessons. Lyra groaned. Can't I just fight people instead? If only it were that simple. The politics lessons were worse than the combat training. Roderick had commandeered a small chamber off the main hall and filled it with maps, treaties, alliance documents, and territory agreements dating back decades. He sat behind a table covered in papers and gestured for Lyra to sit across from him. The Northern Alliance is made up of 17 packs. He began without preamble. Each controls territory ranging from a few hundred square miles to over 1,000. They're bound by treaty to meet twice yearly and settle disputes through negotiation instead of open warfare. That sounds civilized. It's anything but. Roderick spread a map across the table. The treaties have more loopholes than actual rules, and every alpha spends half their time scheming how to expand without technically breaking the agreements. He started pointing to different territories, naming alphas and their packs. Lyra tried to keep track, but the information came too fast. Ironwood Pack to the west, led by Alpha Theron, aggressive and expansionist. Silverbrook to the north, led by Alpha Kale, old and cunning. Stone Ridge to the east, led by the Alpha Lyra, had just made a truce with. And the Winter Gathering, Roderick continued. It's technically a celebration of the solstice, but it's really a showcase. Alphas bring their strongest warriors, their most accomplished pack members, their wealth and power on full display. It's where alliances are forged and broken, where challenges are issued, where reputations are made or destroyed. And I'm supposed to walk in there as a brand new alpha who used to scrub floors. Exactly. Roderick leaned back. They're going to test you. Some will be direct, challenge you to combat or contests of strength. Others will be subtle, political traps, social manipulation, attempts to make you look incompetent or weak. How do I defend against that? By being smarter than they expect. He pulled out another document. This is a list of every alpha attending. Study it. Learn their histories, their grudges, their ambitions. Know who hates who and why. That information is armor. Lyra took the paper and stared at the names. 17 alphas, 17 packs, hundreds of years of tangled politics and bitter feuds. 3 weeks, she said quietly. I have 3 weeks to learn what you spent decades mastering. Yes. Roderick's expression was grim. So stop wasting time feeling sorry for yourself and start studying. The days blurred together in a brutal rhythm. Combat training with Kelrion at dawn, politics lessons with Roderick until midday, then afternoon spent meeting with pack members and learning the actual mechanics of running a stronghold. Food stores, patrol schedules, dispute resolution, resource management, all the invisible work that kept 300 wolves alive through a northern winter. Lyra fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. But she was learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. Her sword work improved from completely hopeless to merely bad. She started to recognize the patterns in pack politics, the way favors and obligations flowed between families like underground rivers. She learned which wolves respected her new authority and which merely pretended, which could be trusted and which needed watching. And her power, the strange white light that had broken the curse and stopped attacks, began to respond more consistently to her will. She practiced in secret, calling it forth and dismissing it, learning to control the intensity and reach. 1 week before the Winter Gathering, everything changed. Lyra was in the training yard working through sword forms Kelrion had taught her, when Finn came running across the courtyard. "Lady Lyra," he gasped. "Visitors! At the gate!" She lowered her practice blade. "Who?" "Alpha Theron, from Ironwood Pack." Finn's expression was worried. "He's got 30 warriors with him, and he's demanding to see you." Lyra's stomach clenched. Theron was one of the names Roderick had warned her about most strongly. Aggressive, ambitious, and known for testing new alphas with impossible demands. "Where's Kelrion?" "Hunting. He won't be back for hours." "Of course. Because nothing ever happened conveniently." "Get Roderick," Lyra said, "and assemble the guard. Full show of force." Finn ran. Lyra took a breath, centered herself, and walked toward the gates trying to look like a queen instead of a terrified girl playing dress-up. Alpha Theron waited outside the stronghold with exactly the kind of presence Lyra had dreaded. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, built like a bear, with iron gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His warriors flanked him in perfect formation, all wearing matched armor and carrying weapons that gleamed with recent sharpening. Lyra approached the gate with Roderick at her side and 20 of her own guards arrayed behind her. It wasn't nearly as impressive as Theron's display, but it would have to do. "Alpha Theron," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Welcome to Vane territory. What brings you here?" Theron studied her with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. "So it's true. Roderick really did lose his pack to an orphan girl." "Roderick stepped aside," Lyra corrected. "And I prefer Queen." "Queen." Theron smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Bold claim for someone who's held power for less than 2 weeks. Bold facts require bold claims. A ripple of surprised laughter from Theron's warriors. The Alpha himself looked momentarily taken aback, then genuinely amused. "I like you," he said. You've got spine. He gestured to his warriors. I came to test whether the stories were true. They say you defeated a raid from Blackridge without losing a single defender. That you forced Marin to kneel. The stories are mostly accurate. Then prove it. Theron stepped forward. My pack and yours. A contest. 3 challenges: combat, strategy, endurance. Winner takes 100 square miles of the loser's territory. Lyra's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of trap Roderick had warned about. Accept and risk losing valuable territory before she'd even established her rule. Refuse and look weak in front of a powerful alpha. No, she said. Theron's expression darkened. You refuse. I counter-offer. Lyra took a breath, praying she was reading this right. 3 challenges, as you said, but instead of territory, winner gets first pick of hunting rights in the disputed borderlands between our packs. Theron's eyes narrowed. The borderlands have been contested for 30 years. Exactly. Neither of us truly controls them, so we both lose resources fighting over them. This way, we settle it cleanly. She met his gaze. Unless you're not confident your pack can win. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Roderick made a small sound beside her. Approval or horror, Lyra couldn't tell. Theron was quiet for a long moment. Then he threw back his head and laughed. A genuine booming sound. You've got teeth, little queen. I'll give you that. He extended his hand. Done. 3 challenges. Winner takes the borderland hunting rights. We compete at the winter gathering where all the alphas can witness. Lyra shook his hand, feeling the crushing strength in his grip. 3 weeks, Theron said. Train hard. I don't want to win too easily. He left with his warriors, disappearing into the forest as quickly as they'd come. The moment they were out of sight, Lyra's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the gate for support, her heart hammering. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Roderick said quietly. Possibly both. What did I just agree to? A public contest at the winter gathering in front of every alpha in the north. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. If you win, you'll have proven yourself worthy of your position. If you lose, we lose hunting rights and I look like an incompetent child. Essentially, Roderick smiled slightly. But you bought yourself time and turned a territory grab into something manageable. That was good thinking. I was terrified. I know, you hit it well. When Caelryon returned from hunting and heard what happened, his reaction was less measured. You agreed to what? He demanded. A contest. 3 challenges. Lyra sat on the edge of the training yard wall, exhausted from the day's events. What was I supposed to do? If I refused, every alpha at the gathering would know I'm too weak to defend my position. And now if you lose, they'll know anyway. Caelryon paced like a caged wolf. Theron's warriors are trained from childhood. His strategists are legendary, and his pack's endurance challenges have broken wolves twice your age and experience. So we train harder. We have 3 weeks. Then we make them count. Lyra slid off the wall and faced him. You said I needed to be bold, to show strength. This is what strength looks like when you don't have an army behind you. You risk what you have to prove you deserve more. Caelryon stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked. You're starting to sound like a queen, he said quietly. I'm starting to feel like one. A terrified queen, but still. He almost smiled. All right. If we're doing this, we do it properly. I'll handle combat training. We'll need Roderick for strategy and... He paused. Do you trust Finn? More than most. Good. He'll handle the endurance challenge. He's young and fast and doesn't carry the old prejudices. Caelyon's expression hardened with determination. 3 weeks to turn you from a servant girl into a champion. Let's get to work. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Lyra trained until her hands bled, until every muscle screamed, until she collapsed in exhaustion and dragged herself up to train some more. Caelryon pushed her beyond what she thought possible, forcing her to fight multiple opponents, to adapt to different weapons, to think tactically instead of just defensively. Roderick drilled her on strategy, territory control, resource management, tactical decision-making under pressure. He set up complex scenarios and made her solve them while exhausted, while distracted, while under verbal attack designed to break her concentration. And Finn worked with her on endurance, long runs through frozen forests, climbing the stronghold walls with weighted packs, exercises that pushed her cardiovascular limits and taught her body to keep moving when her mind screamed to stop. The pack watched these preparations with mixed reactions. Some were inspired, training harder themselves. Others were skeptical, whispering that no amount of preparation could turn a former servant into a warrior capable of defeating Theron's champions. Gregor was the loudest skeptic, though he confined his complaints to muttering while mucking out the stables. Lyra caught him watching her train sometimes, his expression bitter and resentful. She ignored him. She had bigger concerns. 5 days before the gathering, during a particularly brutal sparring session, something clicked. Calrion came at her with his usual speed and precision, his practice blade aimed at her ribs. Instead of blocking defensively like she'd been taught, Lyra did something different. She sidestepped, let his momentum carry him past, and struck at his exposed back. The blade tapped between his shoulder blades. Calrion froze. What was that? A hit? Lyra was as surprised as he was. That was tactical thinking. He turned, his gold eyes bright with something like pride. You saw the opening and took it without hesitation. That's what I've been trying to teach you. I wasn't thinking, I just moved. Even better, your body's starting to remember the patterns. He raised his blade again. Again. Don't stop until you can do it consistently. They went until Lyra landed 3 more hits in a row. When Calrion finally called a halt, both of them were breathing hard and grinning. You're ready, he said. For the combat challenge? For all of it. He clasped her shoulder. You're not the same person who walked out of the Black Keep. You know that, right? Lyra thought about it. The girl who'd been sent north to die would never have challenged an alpha, never have stood up to Theron, never have pushed her body to these limits. I'm still scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Calrion's expression grew serious. Tomorrow we leave for the gathering. The journey takes 2 days, and when we arrive, everything changes. Are you ready? Lyra looked around the training yard, at the stronghold beyond, at the pack that had gone from ignoring her to watching her every move. No, she said honestly, but I'm going anyway. They left at dawn with an entourage of 20 wolves, enough to make a showing, but not so many the stronghold would be left vulnerable. Roderick came, surprisingly, along with Finn and a selection of the pack's best warriors. Selene stayed behind to manage the stronghold, and the look she gave Lyra as they departed could have frozen water. The journey north was cold and hard, the winter landscape unforgiving. But Lyra had walked through worse to reach the Black Keep, and this time she had warm clothes, good boots, and companions who actually wanted her to survive. They camped the first night in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines. While the others set up tents and started fires, Lyra walked to the edge of the camp and stared up at the stars. Nervous? Roderick appeared beside her, quiet for such a large man. Terrified. Good answer. He was quiet for a moment. You know, when I sent you to the keep, I didn't think about you at all. You were just a solution to a problem, a way to protect Selene without technically breaking the sacrifice tradition. I know. I was wrong to do that. Roderick's voice was rough. Not just wrong to send you, but wrong to spend 23 years treating you like you didn't matter. You deserved better. Lyra looked at him, searching for the trap. Why tell me this now? Because tomorrow you're walking into a gathering of alphas who will all make the same mistake I did. They'll see a young, inexperienced female from a powerless background, and they'll dismiss you. He met her eyes. Don't let them. You broke a curse that held for 3 centuries. You freed a king. You defended a stronghold against a raid. You're more than any of them expect, and that's your greatest weapon. That almost sounded like faith in me. Call it pragmatic optimism. Roderick almost smiled. If you fail tomorrow, my pack suffers. So I'm invested in your success. Honest as always. It's one of my few virtues. The winter gathering was held at Silverbrook Territory, in a valley where ancient standing stones created a natural amphitheater. As Lyra's group descended the final ridge, she got her first look at the assembled packs. There had to be 500 wolves gathered in the valley, tents and banners and fires spreading across the snow like a temporary city. At the center, the standing stones rose dark against the white landscape, and between them, alphas and their chosen guards had begun to gather. This is insane, Lyra breathed. This is politics, Calrion corrected. Remember what Roderick taught you. Watch. Listen. Don't commit to anything until you understand all the angles. They descended into the valley. Eyes tracked their approach, hundreds of them, watching the infamous Packless queen who'd overthrown an alpha and claimed ancient bloodline. Lyra kept her head high and her expression calm, even as her stomach churned with anxiety. The center of the gathering was dominated by a large circular space between the standing stones. Alpha Kale, ancient and gray, leader of Silverbrook Pack, stood at the north point, his weathered face creased with years of hard living. "Alpha Lyra," he called as she approached. His voice carried easily across the assembly. "Welcome to the winter gathering. We've heard much about you." "Alpha Kale," Lyra inclined her head respectfully. "Thank you for hosting." "Hosting is tradition." Kale's pale eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "Though this year's gathering promises to be more interesting than most, I hear you've made a wager with Theron." "A contest," Lyra corrected, "to settle the question of borderland hunting rights." "Ah, semantics." Kale smiled thinly. "Still, a bold move for one so new to leadership. Are you prepared to compete?" "I am." "We'll see." Kale raised his voice to address the full assembly. "Let the winter gathering commence. All alphas to the circle." 17 alphas moved forward, forming a ring inside the standing stones. Lyra took her place among them, acutely aware that she was the youngest by at least a decade and the only female alpha present. They were all staring at her. "First order of business," Kyle announced. "Alpha Lyra's claim to leadership of the Vane Pack. Normally, a new alpha would be acknowledged automatically, but given the unusual circumstances of her rise, objections may be heard." Silence. Then Alpha Marcus from Ravenclaw Pack stepped forward. He was middle-aged and lean, with sharp features and shrewd eyes. "I object," he said clearly. "Alpha Lyra claims royal bloodline, but she was raised Packless and has no proof of lineage beyond breaking a curse that may have simply weakened over time. I challenge her right to hold alpha status." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. This was exactly what Roderick had warned about. Political challenges designed to undermine her before the physical contests even began. "The curse was bound to bloodline," Caelryon said, stepping into the circle. "It could only be broken by someone carrying the royal line. That's not opinion. That's how the magic worked." "The word of a king who's been asleep for 3 centuries. Marcus smiled coldly. "Forgive me if I don't find that compelling." "Then what proof would you accept?" Lyra asked. "A lineage scroll, birth records, testimony from family." Marcus spread his hands. "Any of the standard documentation that every alpha possesses, which you know I don't have because I was orphaned as an infant. Then perhaps you shouldn't claim alpha status without it." The trap was elegant. Either admit she had no proof and forfeit her position, or... Lyra felt the power stirring in her chest, the white light that had broken chains and stopped attacks. She'd been practicing, learning to control it, but this was different. This was showing the full assembly what she could do. It was risky, but Marcus had left her no other option. "You want proof of royal bloodline?" Lyra asked quietly. "Fine." She closed her eyes and reached for the power. It came eagerly, flooding through her like sunlight through clear water. She let it build, let it grow, until her skin began to glow with soft white radiance. Then she released it. The light poured from her in waves, spreading across the entire gathering. Where it touched wolves, they felt it, the unmistakable pressure of old magic, ancient power, the kind of sovereignty that predated pack politics by centuries. Every wolf in the assembly felt their knees buckle with the instinctive urge to submit. Even the alphas. Lyra held the power for 10 heartbeats, letting everyone feel the full weight of it. Then she pulled it back, drawing the light into herself until it faded completely. The silence that followed was absolute. "That," she said clearly, "is proof enough." Marcus had gone pale. Around the circle, alphas stood frozen with varying expressions of shock, awe, and calculation. Kyle was the first to recover. A slow smile spread across his ancient face. "I believe the objection has been answered," he said dryly. "Any other challenges to Alpha Lyra's authority?" Silence. "Good. Then let us move to the scheduled contest between Vane Pack and Ironwood Pack." The 3 challenges were set to begin at dusk. Combat first, then strategy, then endurance. Each would be judged by a panel of 3 neutral alphas, and the winner would be determined by best of 3. Lyra stood with her champions, Caelryon for combat, Roderick for strategy, and Finn for endurance, and tried not to throw up from nerves. Theron approached with his own 3 champions, all of them massive and experienced and looking supremely confident. "Last chance to withdraw," Theron said, though his tone was friendly. "No shame in admitting you're outmatched." "We'll see who's outmatched," Lyra replied. The combat challenge took place in a cleared circle marked by torches. Caelryon faced Theron's champion, a scarred veteran named Court, who moved like controlled violence. They circled each other, weapons ready, and the entire assembly fell silent to watch. Court attacked first, his blade moving in powerful strikes designed to overwhelm through sheer force. Caelryon met him calmly, his movements economical and precise, defending without wasting energy. The fight lasted 7 minutes. Court was strong and skilled, but Caelryon had 300 years of experience distilled into instinct. He waited until Court overextended on a particularly aggressive strike, then moved, a blur of speed that ended with his blade at Court's throat. "Yield," the judges called. First point to Vane Pack. The strategy challenge was more complex, a theoretical scenario involving resource management, alliance building, and tactical positioning. Roderick faced Theron's strategist across a map table, both working to solve the same problem with different approaches. Lyra couldn't follow all the nuances, but she watched Roderick work with cool precision, building a solution that accounted for multiple contingencies and unexpected variables. When the judges deliberated, they awarded the point to Ironwood Pack by a narrow margin, 1-1. Everything came down to endurance. The final challenge was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. A race through treacherous forest terrain carrying weighted packs with obstacles and hazards designed to break contestants physically and mentally. Finn stood at the starting line beside Theron's champion, a young wolf named Garrett who had a reputation for never quitting. "Don't try to keep pace with him," Lyra told Finn quietly. "Run your own race. Steady wins over sprinting." Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. The signal sounded and they were off, disappearing into the dark forest with the weight of both packs' pride on their shoulders. The weight was agonizing. Lyra paced at the edge of the crowd, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. Beside her, Caelryon stood with his arms crossed, radiating tension despite his calm expression. "He'll make it," Caelryon said quietly. "How can you be sure?" "Because he's running for you. That's powerful motivation." 30 minutes passed. 40. The crowd grew restless. Then, emerging from the darkness, a figure stumbled into the torchlight. Finn. He was covered in mud and scratches, his pack weighing heavy on his shoulders, but he was moving, still moving, one foot in front of the other, refusing to stop even though every step looked like agony. He crossed the finish line and collapsed. The crowd erupted in shocked cheers. 5 minutes later, Garrett emerged, strong and steady but unmistakably second. The judges conferred briefly, then announced, Vane Pack wins the endurance challenge. Final score, 2-1. Vane Pack claims the borderland hunting rights. The assembly exploded with noise, some cheering, some arguing, all reacting to the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. Lyra knelt beside Finn, helping him sit up. "You did it! You actually did it!" "I couldn't let you down," he gasped. "Not after everything." Theron approached, his massive presence commanding silence. He looked at Lyra for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he knelt. "Queen Lyra," he said formally, "Ironwood Pack acknowledges your victory and honors the terms of our wager. The borderlands are yours." Around them, other alphas watched with new calculation in their eyes. The Packless orphan had just defeated one of the strongest packs in the north, and they'd all witnessed her display of royal power. Lyra stood among the standing stones as the winter gathering continued around her, and for the first time since walking out of the Black Keep, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually do this. The queen they'd never wanted had proven she belonged. The celebration lasted deep into the night, but Lyra barely registered it. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of the gathering, watching wolves from a dozen different packs drink and laugh and tell stories about the contests they'd just witnessed. Caelryon found her there, 2 cups of hot spiced wine in his hands. He offered her one and settled beside her. "You should be in the center of all that," he said, nodding toward the celebration. "They're toasting your victory." "I know." Lyra wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I just needed a minute to breathe." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "You did well today, better than well. You proved yourself in front of every alpha that matters." "I proved I can win a contest." Lyra took a sip of wine. It was warm and sweet and burned pleasantly going down. "That's not the same as proving I can rule." "It's a start." Caelryon looked at her sideways. "What's really bothering you?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She watched the firelight dance across the snow and thought about everything that had happened in the past month. From servant to sacrifice to queen. From powerless to powerful. From invisible to the center of attention. "I'm scared I'm going to mess this up," she said finally. "All these wolves are counting on me now. Not just the Vane pack, but did you see how some of the other alphas looked at me after the contest? They're watching, calculating. Some of them are probably already planning how to use me or manipulate me or form alliances. That's how pack politics work." "I know, but I spent 23 years invisible. No one cared what I thought or wanted. Now suddenly everyone cares, and I don't know if I can—" She stopped, frustrated with her inability to articulate the fear. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I trust the wrong person or miss something obvious and people get hurt because of it? Caelryon set his cup down and turned to face her fully. "You will make wrong choices. You will trust the wrong people sometimes. You will miss obvious things and make mistakes that hurt people. That's not reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest." His gold eyes caught the firelight. "Every leader makes mistakes, Lara. The difference between good leaders and bad ones isn't perfection. It's what you do when you realize you've messed up. Do you double down and pretend you were right all along, or do you admit the mistake and fix it? I don't want to hurt people. Then don't be cruel on purpose. Don't dismiss suffering because it's convenient. Don't treat people as disposable." He reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "You know what it's like to be powerless. That knowledge will make you a better queen than any amount of training or bloodline ever could." Lyra leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing in me when I don't." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the celebration continue around them. Then Lyra spotted movement at the edge of the gathering, 3 alphas approaching together, their expressions serious. Caelryon saw them too and straightened. "Company." The 3 alphas were Kyle from Silverbrook, Marcus from Ravenclaw, and a woman Lyra recognized as Alpha Helena from Moonwater Pack. All of them older, experienced, and carrying the weight of years in leadership. "Queen Lyra," Kyle said formally. "Might we speak with you?" Lyra stood, setting her cup aside. "Of course." Helena spoke next, her voice low and measured. "What you did today, showing that power in front of the full assembly, that changes things. The other alphas are talking. Some are impressed. Others are frightened. All of them are wondering what it means for the balance of power in the North." "I didn't do it to upset any balance," Lyra said carefully. "Marcus challenged my authority. I defended it." "We know." Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. "And I apologize for forcing your hand. But Helena's right. That kind of power, old magic, royal sovereignty, it hasn't been seen in the Northern Territories for centuries. People don't know how to respond." "What are you asking me?" Kale exchanged glances with the other 2, then spoke. "We're proposing something unprecedented. A formal alliance between 4 packs, Silverbrook, Ravenclaw, Moonwater, and Vane. Not a temporary treaty, but a genuine coalition with shared resources, mutual defense, and coordinated leadership." Lyra's mind raced. This was huge. 4 packs working together would create a power block that could rival any other group in the North. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why offer this to me?" "Because you're different," Helena said. "You didn't inherit power through bloodline privilege. You earned it by surviving. That makes you dangerous to the old order, but it also makes you someone who might actually change things for the better. And because," Kyle added with a slight smile, "we're pragmatic enough to recognize that aligning with you now, while you're still building your position, is smarter than opposing you later when you're established. Honest as always, Kael, Caelryon observed. It's my most endearing quality. Kael looked back at Lyra. You don't have to answer now. Think about it. Talk to your advisors. But know that the offer is genuine. We're willing to bet our pack's futures on the belief that you'll be a force for something better than the endless territorial squabbling that's defined the North for generations. They left before Lyra could respond, disappearing back into the celebration. Well, Caelryon said quietly, that's interesting. That's terrifying. Lyra sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. 4 packs. That's almost a third of the Northern Alliance. If we form that coalition, you become one of the major powers in the North practically overnight. Caelryon's expression was thoughtful. It's a smart offer. Kael's right that aligning with you now gives them influence over how your power develops. But it also gives you resources, protection, and political legitimacy you couldn't build on your own for years. Do you trust them? Kael, mostly. Helena, probably. Marcus is more complicated. He's ambitious, but he's also calculating enough to honor agreements when they serve his interests. Caelryon paused. The real question is whether you trust yourself to manage that alliance without being manipulated. Lyra thought about it. A month ago, she would have said no immediately. She would have assumed she was too inexperienced, too naive, too likely to be used. But she'd spent the last month learning, training, proving herself repeatedly. I think I could, she said slowly. With help, with advisors I trust, with... She stopped as shouting erupted from the center of the gathering. Both she and Caelryon were on their feet instantly, hands going to weapons. They pushed through the crowd to find wolves forming a circle around 2 figures squared off in the torchlight. Gregor and Finn. Say that again, Finn was snarling, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. I dare you. Gregor's sneer was ugly and familiar. I said she's a fraud. A packless nothing playing at being queen because she got lucky with bloodline she didn't earn. She earned everything, Finn shot back. She survived you people treating her like garbage for 23 years. She walked into death and came back stronger. She beat Theron's pack in fair contest. What have you done besides betray everyone who trusted you? I tried to protect the pack from making a mistake. Gregor stepped closer, his fists clenched. And I was right. Watch. Give her 6 months and she'll run this pack into the ground, and everyone who's kneeling to her now will remember that some of us warned them. Enough, Lyra said sharply, pushing into the circle. Both of you, stand down. Finn stepped back immediately. Gregor just smiled. Or what, Queen? You'll strip me of more rank I don't have? Make me scrub more floors? He laughed bitterly. I've been doing the work you used to do. Funny how it feels different when it's punishment instead of just life, isn't it? Lyra felt the power stirring in her chest, anger and frustration trying to manifest as white light. She forced it down. You think I don't know what you're doing? She asked quietly. You're trying to provoke me. Make me angry enough to hurt you in front of witnesses, so you can play the victim and undermine my authority. Maybe I just want you to admit what you really are. A servant pretending to be royal. I am royal. Whether I knew it or not, whether I was raised to it or not, the blood doesn't lie. Lyra moved closer, keeping her voice low. But you're right about one thing. I was a servant. I know exactly what it feels like to be dismissed, degraded, treated as less than human. You wanted me to experience that. Congratulations. You succeeded. Gregor's expression flickered, just for a moment, something that might have been shame. Here's the difference between us, Lyra continued. You learned cruelty from being powerful and wanted to keep others beneath you. I learned compassion from being powerless and want to lift others up. She straightened. You're going to spend the rest of your life doing the work I used to do, not as punishment, but as education. Maybe, if you actually learn what it's like, you'll become a better person. Or maybe you won't. Either way, that's your choice. She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. But Gregor, if you ever threaten my people again, if you sabotage or undermine or betray anyone under my protection, I won't strip your rank or make you scrub floors. I'll exile you. And winter in the waste alone kills quickly. The threat hung in the air like ice. Gregor stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw actual fear in his eyes. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring about what they'd witnessed. Lyra found herself surrounded by pack members, some offering support, others just wanting to be near the center of the drama. She pushed through them all until she found open air again. Roderick was waiting at the edge of the crowd, his expression thoughtful. "That was well handled," he said. "Was it? I threatened to exile him." "He threatened your authority in front of representatives from every major pack. You had to respond with strength." Roderick gestured back toward where Gregor stood alone, isolated by his own bitterness. "But you also gave him a path to redemption. That's more mercy than most alphas would show." "I don't want to rule through fear." "You don't have to, but you do have to make clear that betrayal has consequences." Roderick was quiet for a moment. "I heard about Kale's offer, the 4-pack alliance. Word travels fast. Always does at gatherings." He looked at her directly. "Are you going to accept?" "I don't know yet." "What do you think I should do?" Roderick seemed surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "I think you should negotiate. Kyle's offering alliance on his terms. Make sure the terms serve your interests too. Demand equal voice in coalition decisions. Insist on autonomy for pack-specific matters. And get everything in writing with neutral witnesses." "That's good advice. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've learned a few things." He paused. "Lyra, I meant what I said before, about being wrong to dismiss you. You're going to be a good queen, maybe a great one. You just need to trust yourself. You're the second person to tell me that tonight. Then maybe it's true." Roderick almost smiled. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we head home, and there's going to be a lot of work to do." The journey back to Vane territory took 3 days instead of 2. They stopped at Silverbrook to discuss the alliance proposal in more detail. Lyra sat in Kael's council chamber with Caelrion, Roderick, and Finn, negotiating the terms of the coalition with Kael, Helena, and Marcus. It was exhausting, detailed work. Every word mattered. Every clause had implications. But slowly, carefully, they built something unprecedented. An alliance based not on temporary mutual interest, but on genuine cooperation and shared vision. When they finally signed the agreement, witnessed by representatives from all 4 packs, Lyra felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She was responsible now for more than just the Vane pack. Her decisions would affect thousands of wolves across multiple territories. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. They reached home on a clear winter afternoon, the sun bright against fresh snow. The stronghold looked different somehow, or maybe Lyra was seeing it differently. Not as the place where she'd been invisible and powerless, but as home. As responsibility. As possibility. Celine met them at the gates, her expression carefully neutral. "Welcome back. I trust the gathering went well?" "Better than expected," Lyra said. She dismounted and handed her horse to a waiting stable hand. "We need to talk. All of us. There are things the pack needs to know." An hour later, the main hall was packed. 300 wolves crowded in to hear what their queen had to say. Lyra stood on the Alpha's platform, feeling the weight of all those eyes, and took a breath. "A month ago," she began, "most of you knew me as a servant, someone invisible, someone who didn't matter." She let that sink in. "Some of you treated me with casual cruelty. Some of you simply ignored me. A few, very few, showed me small kindnesses when no one was watching." The hall was silent. "I don't tell you this to make you feel guilty," Lyra continued. "I tell you this because I want you to understand something fundamental about how I'm going to lead. I remember what it's like to be powerless. I remember what it's like when the people in charge don't see you as human. I remember hunger and cold and fear and the certainty that no one cared if I lived or died." She looked around the hall, meeting eyes, making sure they understood. "I'm never going back to that, and I'm never going to let anyone under my protection feel that way again." She straightened her shoulders. "We're going to change how this pack works. No more servants treated as disposable. No more wolves dismissed because they weren't born to the right families. Power and respect will be earned through merit, not inherited through bloodline." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, some uncertain, some openly resistant. "I know this is different," Lyra said. "I know change is hard, but I also know we can be better than what we were. We proved that at the winter gathering. We worked together, former servant and former alpha, young wolves, and experienced warriors. And we won. Not because we were the strongest, but because we refused to give up. She paused, letting that sink in. I also want you to know that we've entered into a formal alliance with Silverbrook, Ravenclaw, and Moonwater packs. This coalition makes us stronger, safer, and opens opportunities for trade and cooperation we've never had before. But it also means we'll be called on to help our allies when they need us, to contribute resources, to work together for mutual benefit. More murmurs. Roderick stepped forward to explain the specific terms of the alliance, and Lyra was grateful to let him handle the details. She was exhausted from the emotional weight of the speech. When the assembly finally dispersed, Lyra found herself alone on the platform. She sat on the edge, legs dangling, and looked out at the empty hall. Footsteps approached. Maurice, the kitchen master's daughter, the closest thing to a friend Lyra had had before everything changed, climbed onto the platform and sat beside her. "That was a good speech," Maris said quietly. "Was it?" "I think so." Maris was quiet for a moment. "I should have said goodbye when they took you to the keep. I should have done something, said something. I was a coward." "You were scared. Everyone was scared." "That's not an excuse." Maris looked at her hands. "You were my friend and I let them send you to die without even acknowledging it. I'm sorry." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. "I forgive you." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Lyra bumped her shoulder against Maris's. "I spent too long being angry at the world. I'm tired of it. I'd rather forgive and move forward." They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder like they used to sit in the kitchens late at night when everyone else was asleep. "So what now?" Maris asked finally. "You're queen of a pack, part of a major alliance, probably going to be one of the most powerful leaders in the North. What's next?" Lyra thought about it. A month ago, her future had been measured in days. Walk to the keep, die in the dark, be forgotten. Now it stretched ahead of her, full of possibility and challenge and terrifying responsibility. "Now," she said slowly, "I figure out how to actually be the queen everyone thinks I am. I learn, I grow, I make mistakes and fix them. I build something better than what came before." "That's ambitious." "I know," Lyra smiled, "but I've gotten good at impossible things lately." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Lyra restructured the pack hierarchy, creating new positions based on skill and dedication rather than family connections. She established councils to advise on different aspects of pack life: hunting, defense, resource management, dispute resolution, and made sure those councils included wolves from all levels of the old hierarchy. Some of the changes were met with resistance. Several families who'd held power for generations objected to suddenly having to earn their positions. A few wolves left, unwilling to adapt to the new order. But more stayed, and more importantly, wolves who'd been invisible before, like Lyra had been, started to step forward, to contribute, to show talents and abilities that had been wasted before. Finn became head of the youth training program, teaching young wolves that strength came in many forms. Maris took over supply management, her years in the kitchens having given her a better understanding of resource needs than anyone else in the pack. Even Gregor, slowly and reluctantly, began to change. The work humbled him. The daily reality of being at the bottom of the hierarchy, doing the jobs he'd once dismissed as beneath him, started to chip away at his arrogance. Lyra watched it all unfold and felt something she'd never expected to feel: pride. 3 months after the winter gathering, a messenger arrived from Blackridge territory. Alpha Marin herself rode into the stronghold with a small escort, her iron-gray hair wild from the wind and her expression unreadable. Lyra met her in the courtyard, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Alpha Marin, this is unexpected." "Is it?" Marin dismounted and approached. "Our truce has 3 months left. I wanted to see what you'd done with the time." "And?" Marin looked around the courtyard, at the wolves training together regardless of rank, at the new structures being built to house the expanded alliance coordination, at the general air of purpose and energy. "You've changed this place," Marin said finally. "It feels different from when I attacked." "Different good or different bad?" "Different interesting." Marin smiled slightly. "I came to make you an offer. When our truce ends in 3 months, instead of going back to being rivals, I propose we extend the truce, indefinitely, with trade agreements. Lyra blinked, surprised. Why? Because I'm a pragmatist. Your alliance with Kael, Helena, and Marcus controls a third of the North. Fighting you would be stupid, but more than that? Marin's expression grew serious. I've been watching how you lead. Word travels. The way you treat your pack, the changes you're making, the fact that you care about more than just accumulating power. That's rare. You attacked me 3 months ago. I did. And you showed me mercy when you could have destroyed my pack. That stuck with me. Marin extended her hand. So I'm offering friendship instead of enmity. What do you say? Lyra thought about it for exactly 2 seconds, then grasped Marin's hand firmly. I say yes. Welcome to the Alliance, Alpha Marin. The spring thaw came early that year, melting the snow and revealing new growth beneath. Lyra stood on the stronghold walls at dawn, watching the sun rise over mountains that no longer looked quite so harsh. Kaelrion joined her, 2 cups of tea in his hands. It had become their morning ritual, watching the sunrise together, talking about the day ahead, just being present with each other. Big day, he said, offering her a cup. Every day is big lately. Lyra wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. But yes, the spring gathering. First time I'll attend as an established alpha instead of a curiosity. Nervous? Terrified, as usual. She smiled, but ready. Kaelrion was quiet for a moment, watching the sunrise paint the world gold and crimson. You know, when you first walked into the Black Keep, I didn't think you'd survive the first night. Honest, as always. You looked half dead already, frozen, starving, convinced you didn't matter. He turned to look at her. Now look at you, queen of a pack, leader of a 5-pack alliance, architect of social reforms that are changing how the entire Northern Territories think about power and hierarchy. You helped make that happen. I supported. You did the work. His gold eyes were warm. I'm proud of you, Lyra. She felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Thank you. For everything. For believing in me before I believed in myself. Always. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the world, burning away the last remnants of winter. Below them, the pack was waking. Fires were being lit. Wolves were emerging from their homes to start the day's work. Children were playing in the courtyard, their laughter bright and clear. It was a good sound. A sound that said life was being lived, that people were safe and fed and cared for. A sound Lyra had never heard in this stronghold before she became queen. You know what the best part is? She said quietly. What's that? When I was walking to the Black Keep, I thought my life was over, that I'd never mattered and never would. She looked down at the thriving pack below. I was so wrong. My life was just beginning. I just didn't know it yet. Kaelrion smiled and raised his cup in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Lyra echoed. They drank as the sun rose higher, as the pack came to life, as the world turned toward spring and warmth and possibility. The spring gathering was held in neutral territory, in the same valley of standing stones where the winter gathering had taken place. But this time, when Lyra rode in with her alliance at her back, she was met not with skepticism, but with respect. Alphas nodded to her, warriors saluted. Even wolves from packs she'd never met looked at her with recognition and something approaching reverence. Word had spread, the Packless orphan who'd become queen, the servant who'd freed a king, the young alpha who'd beaten Theron and formed an unprecedented alliance and was changing the fundamental structure of pack society. She'd become a legend without even trying. The gathering itself was less dramatic than the winter one. Alliances were renewed, disputes were settled, trade agreements were negotiated. Lyra sat among the alphas as an equal, her voice carrying the same weight as those who'd led for decades. It should have felt surreal. Instead, it felt earned. On the final night, as wolves from every pack gathered around massive bonfires to celebrate the season, Lyra found herself approached by a young woman, maybe 17, thin and nervous, with the bearing of someone used to making themselves small. Queen Lyra, the girl asked hesitantly. I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to tell you something. You're not bothering me. What's your name? Astrid. I'm from Ravenclaw Pack. The girl glanced around nervously. I'm nobody important. Just, I work in the kitchens. But I heard about you, about what you were before and what you became, and I wanted to say," she took a shaking breath, "thank you." "For what?" "For showing people like me that we can be more than what we were born to, that being invisible doesn't mean being worthless." Astrid's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I've spent my whole life being told I don't matter, that I should be grateful for scraps and keep my head down. But you proved that's a lie. You proved that power can come from anywhere, that anyone can rise if they're brave enough." Lyra felt her own throat tighten with emotion. She reached out and took Astrid's hands. "You matter," she said firmly. "Never let anyone tell you different. And if they try, if your alpha or your pack or anyone treats you like you're disposable, you tell them Queen Lyra said every wolf deserves respect and dignity. And if they don't listen, you come find me. My alliance protects those who can't protect themselves." Astrid's tears spilled over. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She fled before Lyra could say anything else, disappearing into the crowd. Calrion appeared at Lyra's side. "Making converts? Making promises I hope I can keep." Lyra watched Astrid vanish among the celebrating wolves. There are probably hundreds like her, thousands. Wolves who've been invisible their whole lives, who've been told they don't matter. And now they have a champion, someone who proves change is possible. Calrion smiled. "You're not just leading a pack anymore, Lyra. You're leading a movement." "That's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are." The celebration continued around them, fires burning bright against the spring darkness. Somewhere in the crowd, Finn was laughing with wolves from other packs. Maris was trading recipes with Silverbrook's cooks. Roderick was deep in conversation with Kael about alliance logistics. Even Gregor was there, standing awkwardly at the edge of a group, not quite included, but not completely isolated either. He caught Lyra's eye across the fire, and for the first time since she'd known him, he nodded. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. It was a start. "You know," Lyra said quietly to Calrion, 6 months ago I was walking to what I thought was my death. I had no power, no future, no hope. I genuinely believed my life would end in that keep, and no one would care. And now? Now I'm standing in a valley surrounded by 500 wolves, half of whom see me as a leader worth following. I have allies, friends, a purpose that matters. I have a future that's terrifying and exciting and full of possibility." She turned to look at him. "How did this happen?" "You happened." Calrion's gold eyes reflected the firelight. "You refused to accept the role they gave you. You broke a curse, freed a king, challenged the old order, and built something new from the pieces. You did all of that. We did it, together." "Together," he agreed. He held out his hand. "So what do you say? Ready to keep changing the world?" Lyra took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth in his grip. "Ready," she said. They stood together at the edge of the celebration, looking out at the future they were building, a future where power came from merit instead of birth, where invisible wolves could rise, where compassion was valued as much as strength, a future where a packless orphan could become a queen. The fires burned bright, the wolves celebrated, and in the distance the sun set over mountains that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms for thousands of years. Somewhere in those mountains, the Black Keep stood empty, its curse broken, its prisoners finally at rest. And somewhere in the forests and valleys of the northern territories, young wolves who'd been told they didn't matter heard the story of Queen Lyra and dared to believe they could be more. The sacrifice no one wanted had become the queen everyone needed, and the world would never be quite the same.